My wife had an affair with my best friend, who is also my cousin. Now she is emotionally manipulating me while taking responsibility. Long-time reader, first-time contributor. Firstly, I'd like to start by saying that my wife was always a good wife, and she has made a huge mistake that is out of character that might cost us our marriage, so please keep that in mind as you read on. I have a cousin who was also my closest friend. As my closest friend, he was often at my house when I lived with my parents, and he continued to visit me frequently after I got married. I have been married for 3 years. During these visits, my wife, who is normally shy and reserved around my friends, began to hang out with us from time to time because he became very familiar with his constant visits, and she saw him as a cousin of hers as well. It's also important to note that my wife has some undiagnosed mental illnesses such as borderline personality disorder, BPD, seasonal depression, and unresolved abandonment issues from her childhood. Anyway, eventually my wife began to join my cousin and I when we would hang out together outside of the home as well, and we regularly started hanging out all together, which I didn't think was an issue because I was always around. I now know that I was essentially setting myself up for failure by helping them create a bond. Fast forward to this past weekend, and after weeks of my wife constantly crying and feeling depressed beyond anything I've ever seen, which I had put down to her existing mental health issues, she confessed to me that the reason why she has been feeling this way is because of overwhelming guilt about having developed an emotional attachment to another man. At this point, she was completely distraught and could barely get her words out, so I simply comforted her while trying to hold in my shock and anger at what I had just heard. Mind you, at this point, I thought she was just messaging a random guy on Instagram, and she started catching feelings for him and felt really bad about it. But it was much worse than that. She eventually confessed that it had been going on for some time, 12 months since her first feelings, that she suppressed, 9 months since they started talking on and off, 3 to 4 months since they started talking every day, and 2 months since they confessed that they had these feelings, and they have both said individually that they tried to end it at that point but couldn't do it straight away and things became romantic without getting physical, and my cousin eventually ended things officially around 4 weeks ago. Also note, I spoke to my cousin and he confessed without him knowing that my wife had told me that he was her affair partner, and their stories matched up, so at least their stories matched up. So now that you're all caught up, I need some advice. Is there any way that this marriage is repairable, or should I just move on and find someone that I can actually trust? Because I definitely cannot trust her right now, and I'm not sure if I will ever again. I've spoken to 2 sheiks, one individually and one with my wife, and they've both advised me to not rush into any decisions, but one told me to wait 2 to 3 weeks and one told me to wait 4 to 6 months. The one who told me to wait 4 to 6 months then later told me that I might have to end things sooner, if my wife's mental condition doesn't improve because the marriage seems unsustainable. My wife and I are both 25 and have no kids. What makes this decision even more difficult is that I feel I have to consider my wife's mental health in making a decision. She is melange at times and often says she doesn't want to live anymore because of what she's done. She's filled with guilt, but she's also admitted to me that she's still grieving the loss of the friendship she had with my cousin, which makes my blood boil. The sheik said this is normal but to monitor if she still feels this way in the next few months. I'm really annoyed and angry because I've always been a pretty stress-free person, as well as someone who's very loyal and family-orientated, so not only has this been the biggest betrayal imaginable, apart from things getting physical, but it has also made me dread upcoming family gatherings where my cousin will be, and I will be expected to bring my wife because of course no one in our family knows about this. My wife is very clear that she only wants to be with me and she wants to make this marriage work more than anything, claiming she would die for me and would rather die than hurt me again. I know, it's dramatic, but that's how she is. I've known her my entire adult life and even though our marriage is not perfect, we've been pretty compatible so far, and I simply can't imagine life without her, even though she's hurt me in the most unimaginable way. I really didn't want to go through making this story public, but I feel desperate and lost. If anyone has been through anything similar or knows of anyone who has, your advice would be appreciated even more. Thanks if you've read the whole thing. Update 1. So it's been 2 months to the day since D-Day, and I've been through all the emotions of grief in that time, while trying to wait the 2 to 4 months that different sheiks recommended, as not to rush my decision. In these 2 months, my wife and I have had our ups and downs, but to be honest, it's been mostly downs due to my ongoing depression about the situation. The ups have been laughing about things and goofing around sometimes like old times, but I often quickly remember what she did and my face physically drops, especially in the earlier weeks. Nowadays, I spend most of my time trying to stay distracted by playing football, going to the gym, spending time at the mosque / with good brothers, etc. Some days I spend as little time around my wife as is reasonably possible, because when I'm with her I'm faced with a lot of confusion, because I obviously still have affection towards her but she hurt me in an unbelievable way. I also find myself thinking a lot more clearly when I'm not with her, and then when I'm with her I'm confused again. In terms of her behavior at home, she has been extremely loving, as is her nature, and continues to be a good wife in terms of looking after the home, making me breakfast before work, packing my lunch, etc. However, her negative personality traits such as her temper / foul language have reared their ugly heads, as well as some other issues which I'll touch on a bit later in the post. In the weeks and months since the confession, she has been mostly understanding and patient, but every now and again she cracks and has enough of me bringing it up. I've brought up the issue pretty much every day, a lot more often in the first 6 weeks, but I still do it now. I know this isn't good, and it isn't because I love talking about the issue, it's because it's still at the front of my mind. I've seen a psychologist, 1 session so far, and have continued seeing a sheik for counseling, and we saw the same sheik as on D-Day for marriage counseling.